brightly.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. We've got time slotted for about an hour. I'm going to walk through just a little bit of an agenda and the opening here, and then just jump right into the content. We've got Dude Solutions people, Alpha Facilities as an engineering group, and then also Paul Lozo from the University of Richmond leading this webinar with us today. So just to give you a few logistical items here, all the phone lines are muted. There's a Q&A section. So if you have questions as we go, feel free to throw them in that chat. I will see them and we will address them as quick as we can. And then we also have a session at the end of the webinar that's specific to Q&A, so that you're able to ask anything that you like. Also via that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see that. Just to make a few introductions to give you an idea who's here. We have myself, Daniel McCauley. I'm one of the strategic account managers here at Dude Solutions. I've been here about 8 years. My background's in asset management in the Air Force. I was doing that for about 8 years. So got a total of 15 or so under my belt with a whole lot of different types of conversations. Luke Anderson, also from Dude Solutions, very similar. He's got a background in building automation and has his FMP. So a lot of good experience in his conversations. Ashay Prabhu, he is one of our vice presidents of strategic asset management and has, I'm not going to age him, but we'll say 30 years in the asset management space, doing a whole lot of different things from tactical level of asset management all the way up to strategic level. And then Keith Jones, he is from Alpha Facilities. He's their chief practice officer as a part of their engineering group. And then rounding us out, Paul Lozo. He's the director of environmental operations at the University of Richmond. So got a good set of panel people here for you today to walk through a few different things. I want to give you just a brief overview of this agenda. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but wanted to just give you an idea of what we're talking about today. One of the big focuses is around stimulus. You know, after COVID happened in 2020, there was some funding that came out in March that was about $30 billion. And then there was another set of funding specific to the educational industry, if you will, higher ed, public, private, K through 12 education arena. There's another $80 billion that came out in December. And what they're working on now is about another $170 billion to come out at the end of Q1 in 2021. So that will be arriving shortly. And there's just been some interesting articles that have came to light in the last few weeks on stimulus funding, whether it's it allows for different HVAC projects and retrofits and replacements at the system and asset level due to indoor air quality, or it's sanitation related things. So as we look at just quality of life inside of our buildings, how are we managing that, and what kind of quality do we need to bring to the table due to COVID last year? So what we want to do to kick off this meeting is actually have a poll. We've got four interactive polls, which you should have seen just pop up on your screen. So this is just a question for the group. If you could all click which option is best for you all, we'll get some live results and discuss that briefly. So this first one's set up with two bookends. No gap, meaning I've got plenty of funding. I'm really looking at how I should prioritize it. And then the other bookend being I've got a pretty significant gap. Our backlog's continuously growing. We're not on pace to be able to handle our deferred maintenance. So those are your two bookends as a part of that poll. So I'll give you guys just a second to click through that, and then we'll publish the live results. All right. Thank you for participating in that. It's good to see. We've seen some interesting case studies and research into the higher ed client base that we've got. There's about 1,500 organizations that we work with, and we've seen some that are in that no gap, that are at the private school organization type of setup, and it's few and far between. And most of the people are what you filled out here today, being the large gap. Paul, kind of want to point these results to you and get your thoughts just based on what you've seen at Richmond, but also just in general at your network, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. Frankly, I'm not really surprised at the results at all. I kind of expected most of it to land somewhere between the medium and the large gap areas. Would have been shocked with a no gap, so that doesn't surprise me. There's nothing there, but I think like most college campuses, we all experience some type of funding gap, and I think what I find to be really important is having an accurate data set, which allows people to be able to reallocate the funds to higher priority needs. It basically tells a story. So if you don't have a good snapshot of what the condition of your campus, the life cycle, your existing assets, you may not necessarily know where to funnel your money to be able to take care of deferred maintenance or capital renewal needs. It basically it justifies funding as well. So if you are allotted X amount of dollars per year, but obviously if you don't have the proper data to tell a story to request more funding, you're going to be sort of stuck in that gap. So I think it's important to be able to have that information to not only when you think about going into to do any work in a particular building, it's not just about refreshing the building, the finishes or the technology. It's also about the infrastructure in the building and taking care of components or assets at their end of their life cycle needs. So I find that in order to look at a different spending model or to request additional funding, just having accurate data to be able to tell that story so that you can get into the building instead of doing a refresh and ask for additional funding to take care of any deferred maintenance needs, especially on the MEP side of the house, as it relates to deferred maintenance and capital renewal.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you sharing there, Paul. I think that it ties a lot to what we're going to talk about here. And so I'll transition us just a little bit. Shay is going to talk to us a little bit about what the stimulus can look like, and specifically how can we use it strategically. So I'll let him kick off some of the discussion there.
Yeah, access to stimulus funding. Thanks, Daniel. We're all experiencing change at the moment. We are using our life cycle planning to educate, collaborate, trade off between all our service programs and attracting the most stimulus that we potentially can in these bizarre times in terms of renewal and maintenance. And these are all questions of importance, and it's about having the best story in the room, like Daniel said, in terms of this, in terms of attracting the stimulus, in terms of even preserving the level of funding that we have individually traditionally had, and then seeking more in terms of an infrastructure reserve or a deferred maintenance reserve or a capital reserve that can fund what is likely to also come up in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So if we flick to the next slide, these are all really hard questions that allow us to answer this problem, not just from a stimulus perspective per se, but from a life cycle planning perspective that allows to answer the questions that drive the business case for stimulus. So it's about putting in front of the stakeholders a true picture of the long-term financial plan, putting in front of the stakeholders what the state of assets looks like now, and what would it look like in 5, 10, or 20 years, depending on how we make our decisions. What's our backlog if we spend less money? What's our backlog if we spend a little bit of more money? How much of that backlog can be eradicated by accessing stimulus or even accessing infrastructure loans at literally 0% interest rate at the moment? How do I tell this story so my stakeholders have faith, have belief that we're in control of the future? How do I change direction to reduce the amount of assets, whether it's in plant and equipment or the structure or outside the building, inside the building? How do I change course to ensure that I have the least amount of assets below an acceptable service level? How do I define that service level, that delight factor, that function and capacity that I want to deliver into the future? If my student intake increases or decreases, if I have an external issue like we had last year, which changes the way we deliver our programs, what impact does that have on my financial plan and my long-term asset management plan? And unless this is encapsulated as a story, we are at a point in time where it's almost impossible to articulate why. And he or she who has the best story is likely to have the best shot at an infrastructure reserve or stimulus funding, or simply preserving the level of money we have in order to save the assets from reaching into future backlog. Thanks, Daniel. That was what I had to articulate on that piece.
No, I appreciate it. I think that it's real interesting, some of these problems that people are looking to solve. And if you think about going back to the stimulus funding, what's interesting about it is that we can't necessarily guarantee that the funding that comes to the organization is going to be able to be driven towards asset related things, replacements, rehabilitations, things of that nature. But if they're not, a lot of people have scrambled to earmark budget towards COVID related things now. And so it does free up that money. So if I've got $100,000 on a line item and we end up getting this extra funding, there's now a free $100,000 that, everybody in the organization is going to have their hand out for. And if I can sit there and say, hey, I have a problem, I know how to solve it, here's the data, it's a lot easier for that $100,000 to come to my department. So appreciate you sharing that, Ashay. We're actually going to do one more poll. Want to bring up one more poll for you, and this is all about the data. One of the biggest things that plays a role in being able to solve some of these problems is, do I have the information internally to describe what my story needs to be? So I'll give you just a second to take a look at this poll question, and then we'll publish the live results again. Okay, perfect. Paul, may I ask you to comment on this as well? I know that from a data perspective, you've kind of ran the gamut from zero to partial to building as you go and outsourcing and all sorts of things. So if you don't mind, share your thoughts on kind of Richmond in general, and then also what you're seeing here on the screen.
Yeah, this is exactly kind of where I thought it was going to land, and kind of to your point, Daniel, we've sort of been all over the map over the years. I guess we always had what I thought was a fairly up-to-date data set, and it was partially accurate. It probably fell right in that 69% area on average. Simply because it's a lot to keep up with. I mean, your data changes all the time, and so it's the old cliche, garbage in, kind of garbage out. But I would say ours was fragmented, I guess is probably the best way to put it. But we ended up partnering with Alpha Facilities, and we leveraged that partnership to consolidate all of our data and assets within a single platform, which helped us accurately prepare our spending model and our budgets. As I was saying a little bit ago, you've got to be able to have accurate data in order to tell a story, and all of our assets and our building components tell a story, and it all drives back to the budget and the funding model. So that leveraging that partnership and being able to have all of this information at our fingertips was just paramount. It basically helps us drive the decision-making process, and it gives us the flexibility to use what funding and budgets that we have to move that money around a little bit based on the needs, based on what the data is telling us. And there's basically 4 different types of facilities analytics that I work with, and it's either descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, or prescriptive. And so all of that data that you get in, as accurate it is, fits in one of those areas, and all those 4 components tell the story on where best to use your allotted budgets.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting. And one of the organizations we work with out in California actually started using, they had a decent data set that they were trying to keep up with each year. And one of the things that we discussed with them with Alpha was looking at RS means data as a purpose of, I want to know how much it costs me to bid a project. And when I look at the larger things inside of the buildings, a lot of it being MEP related, I want to know how much that's going to cost me. And I want to be able to go to my board or council or committee and say, hey, this is how I need to spend this money. This is where it needs to go. And here's the exact cost that we're going to bid out, because we're using RS means data as a part of our capital plan and tying that to some of the state level job costing models that exist. So I'll turn this over to Keith to have him share just a little bit about whether you're at 0 data, you're trying to complete your data set, or how you're looking to move forward. I'll let him walk through those pieces for us.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Appreciate that. So, a great question that we all ask ourselves is, how do we know if services are potentially right for us, or how do we know if it's worth bringing a service company in to acquire all the data versus collecting it ourselves? And the questions that you see before you on the screen are just great starting points. They're great questions that you guys can ask internally as your organization, that you can socialize with leadership to say, hey, we don't have a complete list of our equipment. We have what Joe has collected from our admin building. We have what Jane has collected from our library building, but we don't have a complete, comprehensive, consolidated list of our assets. We have some PMs in place for some of our HVAC related equipment, but we don't have PMs in place across the gamut of assets that we own either. We honestly don't know the true current value of those assets as opposed to where they sit in their current life cycle, and what maybe potentially the anticipated risk of failure are related to those assets. And the real magnitude, or the real big question is, we truly don't know the true magnitude of our deferred maintenance backlog. So, these questions are great starting points for many organizations to be able to ask the question, do I need professional services? Why do professional services potentially fit what our needs are? Next slide, Daniel, please. So then moving on, after you've asked the questions, some of the downstream benefits of the professional services are the detailed understanding of the condition, the life, the replacement cost of your current assets. This data alone helps you it's the starting point for all of the planning that you're putting together to show future needs for, to be able to socialize with your leadership. The data sets help you to validate those financial needs. They really help to reduce the volatility and the scrutinization of that annual budget planning. So I would venture to guess that you guys have all encountered the same things. You've told the same story for years and years and years and years to leadership but they just don't believe you. They see that the buildings are still open, the lights are still on, the buildings are still tolerable from a heating and cooling standpoint. Why do we need $150,000 for this particular building, HVAC dependent, when it feels nice to walk in the building? I'm not getting any complaints of anybody being cold or hot. So the data sets help to validate those financial needs, help to really tell the story of what's coming with those assets. You all know full well that nothing lasts forever. Assets, building systems are degrading on a daily basis. And to be able to use data to show those plans, to show those degradations of those assets is just extremely crucial for your long-term planning. You know, services are going to bring in architects and engineers that are going to standardize your data sets to map what industry best practices and known industry references are. So, you know, as opposed to collecting it yourself where you've got 15 folks on your staff and all 15 of those folks just refer to everything as an air handler, or one person it's an air handler, to another it's a heat pump. So to be able to tie back all those assets to industry standards, to be able to use industry standards like Daniel spoke about with RS-Means for pricing and cost related information is just extremely crucial. Helps again with the ability to keep all of that data from being scrutinized before your leadership. And then providing the forecasting scenarios for investment strategies. This is where you're able to use the data to develop those strategic plans, provide different plans based off of different scenarios. It helps with the justification for bundling projects across a multitude of areas on the campus, as opposed to just singularly focused within a building. And then it identifies what that immediate backlog is, and it really helps to put some asterisks around the magnitude of what your current deferred maintenance looks like. Daniel? So when it comes to services, you know, some of the services you see here on the screen, we have a Texas-based client that in 2010, we went out, we performed just a standard facility condition assessment, equipment inventory, and created the preventative maintenance schedules for that client. And then that client was able to take that data, and with the data from those 3 service options alone, they were able to get their budgets increased. They were able to advocate for additional FTEs, additional resources. Since then, we have come in and performed an IT assessment, an energy audit, and of late, we've come in and done we've collected all of their assets outside of their buildings and put them into GIS so that clients are able to start rolling in energy-based decisions when it comes to replacement of assets. They're able to layer assets outside of the building, bicycle racks, site lighting, benches, trash cans, covered parking, things of that nature. They're able to layer that in GIS, which makes the ability to see some of that work-related work and asset management on a layering effect. And then it helps them to bundle projects as well. Very popular in today's world is understanding where abbreviated accessibility sits, so that as you are working through your current plans, your potential renovation remodels, you can bring what those current ADA policies, how they come into play when you're making those decisions and you're projecting out your projects. And then playground safety, drawing updates. These are just services. We have so many clients that still live on paper. When we ask for a set of plans, when we're performing a facility condition assessment, we're taken to a room, they unlock the door, flip on the light, and it is floor to wall rolls of plans. And our folks are always just told, hey, those plans are in there somewhere, good luck. So this is an option where we can actually come in, we collect all the plans, we take them away, we bring them back, we scan them in, we digitize them, we turn them into CAD, Revit, PDF files, what works best for our client. And we try to help get from that closet full of paper to computers filled with electronic drawings. Daniel?
Perfect. Yeah, appreciate you sharing, Keith. I think that there's just a few key pieces when we talk about inspecting and analyzing the different condition assessments, the assets, the inventories, comparing that to, what condition statuses we need, and how are we going to check all of those boxes if we're ultimately trying to enforce some funding. And a big part of that is how far out we're planning. How accurate is our data set and how far out are we looking? So that's what this poll is on the screen. Wanted to give you all a second again to pick what's best for you all as far as how far you're planning, and then we'll continue from there. All right. Good to see. All right. So one of the things that we've seen pretty regularly, we'll let Paul talk here in a second, but one of the things we've seen pretty regularly is that best case scenario, people are looking out 5 years, and they're doing that associated to a project. So they're saying, I got to know what projects I'm going to do in 5 years, and where we're trying to take a lot of the organizations that we work with is that model's 100% right. Looking at it from a project perspective, 5 years out looks great. But if we've got a good 5 years ahead of us and a bad 5 years right after that, and fifth year, what does that set us up for? So Paul, if you don't mind, I know you guys have spent a good amount of time on this level of planning at Richmond. If you don't mind sharing just a little bit about what that's looked like for you all.
Yeah, and based on these results, we kind of fall right in the middle as well. So we're currently in the process right now as we speak. So we've got a pretty rigorous and granular forecasting model out for the 5 years. We do have some flexibility built in there, but it's a pretty accurate model that basically we put everything within that 5 years, whether it's deferred maintenance, a capital renewal, or a major renovation project. Now, since we've really gathered some accurate data on our assets and things like that, we have now kind of taken that granular effect and starting to roll it out to the 10 years, because we've got that data to be able to tell that story, and it helps us with some long range planning and budgeting, again, with some flexibility. But a good recent example for us is we were sitting down around the table in the last month looking at a particular building, and we pulled out the facility condition assessment, and we looked at a lot of the information and the data that was in there, and we saw that there were quite a few needs that were popping up in a relatively short amount of time. There were some needs that were a year out and 2 years out and up to 4 years out. So we decided collectively to turn that building into a major renovation. So, and then by doing so, we just sort of added on to that scope of that project. And instead of going and requesting funding over the next 3 or 4 years to replace these components that were called out, we've now expanded the budget and we've expanded the scope. And now we're even looking at space planning in that building. So just that little bit of information that we were looking at over the next few years has now just parlayed that into a larger renovation. Again, it's all about the storytelling. So that's one way we use the data and helping us plan. And then the second piece of that is the 5 to 10 year outlook. So we've always done what I thought was a pretty decent job of laying out the 5 to 10 year mark. But again, with the data at our fingertips, and knowing what the life cycle is and the condition of our assets, we're able to have a better snapshot moving forward, and it's dictating when other major renovations are coming forward. It's either bringing them forward on our calendar or it's pushing them back a little bit further based on that information.
You're on mute, Daniel.
Oh, thanks, Shay. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing, Paul. And what I'm going to do, Shay, is instead of me giving dialogue, I know this is going to be something you kind of jump right into, so I'm going to let you just take it from here.
Yeah, thanks. So this is all we've discussed so far is about long-term financial planning and understanding what that backlog looks like. And the really important thing here is that any backlog has to be linked to a level of service we intend to provide. Each level of service we intend to provide has to articulate a financial plan, and that financial plan then articulates what the backlog may look like. Trading off between campuses, trading off between levels of service, for example, a high level of service on a high priority area in a campus that is student facing versus a low priority area that is non-student facing. How does money get divested? So if you go to the next slide, understanding infrastructure deficit is really about understanding the life cycle of the asset. And it doesn't matter whether it's a pump or a chiller or an air conditioning equipment or a pipe under the ground or a structure of the building or a roof. What you'll see as this on this graph is as time passes, the asset ages, and that asset continues to degrade on a path which is typically called the life cycle of the asset. And this could be functional deficiency causing it. It could be not able to meet current standards, not able to meet the capacity that is required by the student community, or lack of fitness for purpose from the provision of the facilities or amenity or accessibility. All of these factors contribute to how that asset degrades over time, including condition, and is typically called the service potential of the asset. And as we speak today, ASCII in the United States, the American Society of Civil Engineers, is just about to release their infrastructure report card for 2020. And most of the states and most of the different asset types, from water to facilities to bridges to transport, will be graded somewhere between a B and an E. It'll be interesting to see where education, schools, etc. land this time round. But really, it's about the service level and the state of assets. So if we go to the next dot point on here, is the decisions that have to be made, which has been spoken about for the last 20-25 minutes, are around the capital expenditure, which are the high cost items, in combination with the day-to-day maintenance, which are the low cost items. So Daniel, if you flick through through that slide, you will see that as time passes, the annual cost of maintenance also starts to escalate from $1 a year notionally to about $5 a year when that asset enters the red zone or the orange zone. And again, I repeat, this could be a structure of a building, the roof, the internal plant and equipment, the floor coverings, and without getting caught up in the shape of that curve, every infrastructure out there is degrading on a pattern that reflects how it's likely to perform over time. And this becomes the mantra of strategic asset management. It's about making decisions on the intervention. On my high priority assets, do I want to maintain a life cycle that intervenes at a D or no worse than a D and continues to keep that asset on the path of no worse than a D? For my really high priority assets, do I want to deliver a level of service that is a B and continue to keep it at a B by doing enough maintenance and renewal and continue that life cycle path into the future? And do I have low student facing, low priority assets that I'm happy to even let drop to an E or an F, provided I keep them safe? And these are the levers that Luke will demonstrate, which get pushed and pulled in order to have a financial plan that is A, sustainable, and B, actually delivers the level of service that we intend to deliver, but more importantly, can articulate an infrastructure gap or a financial gap or a capital gap or a maintenance gap for a level of service that the custodians have set, and provides the basis for having a long-term view as opposed to just a 3 or a 4 year view or a 5-year view. A 20-year view that allows the organization to work backwards to have the correct 10-year plan, the correct 5-year capital works program, and a 2-year window of where things might fail which can be predicted with a high level of certainty. So on that note, I will now hand it over to Luke to get into the depth of the modeling.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shai. Yeah, and I think what I wanted to convey in my little part here, where we just covered the actual, let me turn my camera on here. We covered the degradation curve for the theoretical side, but I want to get into the actual application. So when you think about a degradation curve, you think about an asset through its life cycle. So we buy it new, it's at the top of its curve, and then as it dies, it reaches the bottom of its curve. So how do you actually take advantage of that? So I've got some different funding scenarios. I've got some different things, some real life applications. So I want to walk you guys kind of through what that looks like, kind of on an actual basis. So starting here, right, when we think about a curve, when we think about an individual asset basis, we have multiple instances where we replace something. So when we think about the curve, right, we're thinking about how much percent, what percent of life is left in an asset. The further along the curve, right, the higher we are to 100% of life consumed. So on the screen now, what I've got over here on the left, I've focused in on our cultural center here on campus. I'm specifically looking at the floors in that cultural center over the next 25 years. Right now, we've consumed about 60% of the life. We plan to replace it in about 4 years. In 4 years, that life will reset to zero and will continue to be consumed, go down its curve, till eventually we'll replace it again in year, what is this, 19, 18? So the goal is to now start to look at each individual asset and how it's being affected by the plan that we've chosen. So the entire building, we're going to watch as its condition goes up and down, right? As that condition gets a little bit better, a little bit worse. And as long as we are funding that building, we're funding that capital plan in an appropriate manner, we should see this have a general overall straight line. Right? Where we begin and where we end hopefully does not have a whole lot of separation unless our buildings are in poor condition and they're ending up in good condition. Right? So what happens when budgets get cut, right? We have our plan to do our floors in year 4 and year 12. We have our water and our roofing and everything else. What happens when the COVID hits and when stimulus comes and all this thing gets thrown out of the water is we have to look at what's the impact of change. So that's the next screen I'm going to pull up here. And there's 2 things to look at on this screen. The first are the bars. The bars represent how much money we have. The yellow or green or orange, I'm colorblind, so please forgive me, whatever color this tall bar is, represents a $2 million a year budget. The blue bar represents a $5 million a year budget. The little dotted graph represents the overall condition of my campus. Right? My facilities and my buildings. How's everything look? State 0 here on the right, state 0 is brand new, right? If we built our campus today, everything would be at state 0. 6 down here is end of life, meaning pretty much dysfunctional, defunct, not non-operational, in disrepair, those kinds of things. So with our current budget of 2 million, over the next 25 years, we will be essentially maintaining our overall condition of our buildings and ending in a state that is approximately where we are today, about 2. Now, if that budget gets cut to 500,000, that condition will continue to deteriorate until we reach about a condition 4, then it's going to kind of average out. We still have 500,000, so we'll still be able to maintain some things. We're just going to have to allow our building to essentially go into pretty poor condition because we just don't have the money to replace assets or none. So when we convey this, we want people to start thinking about, okay, well, what does that mean, right? Well, just because the line's going down, how bad is it, right? What does that really mean? So the next step from here is to actually analyze a single location within this model. So the first area that I'm going to show you guys is looking at this underfunded option. It's looking at the idea that we don't have enough money to keep our building in good condition. That's why you see so much red. Green and yellow. Green is early life, yellow is midlife, red is end of life. Unfortunately, my roof in this building is pretty much end of life right now, and I'm not going to have money for the first half of the roof until year 7, and it's going to be at least 15 years before we can handle the rest of the roof. My walls and floors are turning to junk, right? My floors are all scuffed, my paint is peeling, I've got chips and holes in the wall, but we don't have the funding. It's not important enough. We are going to spend some money though. That's what this 6 to 0 is. These are resetting from red to green, but these are also very important. It's HVAC distributions, domestic water, it's sanitary waste. So it's things we have to do. And we're doing them at the expense of our roof, and we're doing it at the expense of our walls and our floors. So this, at a cheaper option, we're still going to be able to maintain the building. We're just going to have to accept the fact that there are certain parts of our building that are going to be very poor. They're going to be, not very nice. And we want to counter that with the other scenario, right, which I'll pull up now, which is now that $2 million budget, which says, okay, well, I know the roof's bad. We'll have it fixed by year 3. Right? We know the walls are getting bad, so we'll have a plan in place by year 7. The floors are already pretty rough, so we'll get those done in year 5. The water and the sanitary waste is still very important, so that's still getting done. But you'll notice that I don't have projects. I don't have parts of my building that we're having to neglect in order to maintain the rest of it. That's right. That's that difference between having an actual funded program where we are looking ahead and understanding the degradation and preparing for those expenses, versus an unfunded program where we're waiting for something to fail, right? The run to fail approach. When it breaks, we plan for it within the next fiscal year and we go ahead and find the money. Well, that doesn't always often work, and many times there's more things broken than there's money to replace. I hope that was a good example. And Shay, send it on back to you.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm just going to share my screen and let me know when that is all good. All good?
Good to go.
So coming back to the theme with the best story wins, the question then becomes, based on the service levels that we set, how do we actually determine our budgets? And the key here is the methodology that is applied to ensure that we have the best potential chance of either attracting stimulus with the best possible plan, or preserving the funding we've got, or more importantly, trading off what we have with a trade-off analysis in strategic asset management. And what does that mean? What that means is there are different ways to spend and determine future budgets, typically based on amortization, last year plus or minus 5%, or based on future needs. And let's have a look at what that means and how the best story is articulated around the practice of strategic asset management. So imagine there is a building on this campus. I've kept this example really, really simple. On the right-hand side, you can still see the life cycle of that building follows a typical curve or a non-linear pattern. Whereas amortization, which is the simplest way to look at that life cycle over its life, follows a very, very straight line pattern over time. 15 years old, it was built in 2006. It's a regional campus with 30,000 square feet of area. It's rated as a level B or a condition score 2 by the assessors that went out there on a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is good and 5 is bad. And based on that scenario of assuming that this building has an estimated 50-year life and costs $3 million today, if it was to get wiped off the planet in terms of its replacement cost, and 1.2 million was the actual historic cost of constructing this building. So if that level of detail was available, then using the simple depreciation straight line method, the answer is quite simple, which is $3 million divided by 50 years gives me an average requirement of about $60,000 per annum. And the assumption there is, like Luke was saying before, it's kind of run to failure. So at some point we'll need to replace parts or all of that facility, and therefore we need to allow about $60,000 per annum in order to be able to fund that when it happens. Very little emphasis on life cycle under this method. If I now shift to the more modern way of thinking, which is based on the level of service, which doesn't just assume an average life of 50 years across the building, looks at various components within the building, has a reasonable level of data structure, is able to look at the actual life cycle, and based on the level of service we intend to provide, and this is the important piece, the level of service we intend to provide, in this case, let's assume we're providing a high service level, then you can see that this financial plan is now delivering a high level of service with frequent renewals of internal components at condition C 2.4 or a condition E, which is 4.8. And it's also got a high level of service every year for inspections, maintenance, and reactive repairs. And if that cost was added over 50 years to deliver a high level of service, we now get an answer which is about $128,000 per annum, not the amortization $60,000 per annum. And it's really important to understand the difference between the two, because this method of asset investment planning actually articulates a real cost of delivering a level of service into the future, as opposed to a hypothetical replacement cost divided by hypothetical life. Alternatively, if that facility was a low priority or a low level of service, or if that area within the facility was a low level of service, then our asset management plan might actually be reduced to not have to frequently intervene, which means I'm delivering a slightly lower level of service because that is equitable, and that returns me an annualized cost of ownership of $75,000. But my intervention levels are now different to a high level of service, and my inspection routine, my responsiveness for my reactive repairs is also delivered at a lower level because I believe that is equitable from a service level perspective. That annualized cost is now different to the $128,000 or the $60,000. So the question becomes, from having a financial plan that is believable, evidence-based, the question becomes, which budget is right? Is a budget that is driven by a more modern practice around the service levels we intend to provide and can balance between the high priority assets and the low priority assets? Is that method of budgeting more appropriate? Or is a method that is based on pure amortization, in fact, based on current replacement cost as opposed to the historical cost of acquisition of that asset, more appropriate? And I'm genuinely putting this on the table for consideration because a number of agencies, without being criticizing or condemning, a lot of agencies are still based on historical cost, which is giving a false picture of the future requirement. A number of agencies are moving towards current cost, which is at least providing a reasonable assessment of the future. And then there are the thought leaders that are moving into the level of service argument, which is to say, if I get stimulus funding, or if I retain the funding that I have, or if I can articulate a financial plan that makes sense, I am now able to trade off and be in control of my long-term financial plan because I can see the difference between a high priority and a low priority. I can trade off the funding between a high priority and a low priority. And I can be in control because that margin for error in this example, which is 50 to 100,000 per building, can be as much as $2 million per year, even in some of the smallest education campuses. And that error is a serious error in terms of being able to articulate to our financial officers, to our custodians, to our chancellors, to our community, to our taxpayers, about what funding is required to be able to continue to deliver these outcomes into the future. And I'm just conscious of time a little bit, so I'll just put the focus here on the people around the table. We're all practitioners. We're at an incredible time at our point in life where selling our story, not as engineers, not as maintenance managers, not as facility owners, but our story as practitioners that are in charge of delivering the services into the future. And our role in terms of selling this story is about demonstrating that we have evidence-based asset management plans that really look at a 25-year view. Like Luke showed before, we are able to articulate the difference between multiple scenarios. We can see the future now without having to really base it on last year plus or minus 5%. We can see the future based on the health of the assets as opposed to just the age of the assets. We can see the future based on the campus capacity, based on the fitness for purpose, and based on standards that are going to dictate what the future classroom is going to look like, what the future way of delivering education is going to look like. Again, not last year plus or minus 10%. So selling this plan without just having one option for the future is where our roles come in if we are to be successful at this thought leadership. And organizations like GASB, which is the Accounting Standards Board, the Finance Officers Association in the United States, the Standards Accounting Board internationally, the MFOA, which is the Municipal Finance Officers Association in Canada. All of these organizations, as we speak, are playing a pivotal role in the ability to sell this story. And selling the story is about understanding what the future looks like. It's about having a live plan 24/7, driven by data, that can articulate what the future of each of my facilities look like, depending on which funding option I choose. And the ability to drill down into my campus, into my facilities, into my rooms, into each individual element level within my building, to be able to drill down and have a look at where the assets are likely to turn red, where the assets are likely to turn orange, where the assets are likely to turn green. The ability to filter and articulate this plan at every level, from the chancellor through to the maintenance department. So there is one view of what the future looks like. And the ability to turn this into a business plan that really looks at, from a current service level perspective, what does the health of our infrastructure look like? From a future service level perspective, what does the health of our infrastructure look like? If I got more money, what would the future of our infrastructure look like? If I had to trade off with the money I have, what does the future of our infrastructure look like? And putting us in control from that perspective, and not just a view of about 3 to 5 years. And on that note, I hand it back to Daniel to take this home in relation to where we are in this really game-changing environment from a stimulus as well as a funding preservation perspective.
Perfect. Thank you, Shay. Let me, if you'll stop sharing for a second, Shay, I will pull back up. I'll pull back up our PowerPoint. Thank you, sir. All right. So we've walked through some things pretty quickly here today, and at a high level overview, there's just a lot of information that we've covered. So we've done a lot of work in 2020 and even recently in January and February of this year. We've probably helped over 40 or 50 organizations specifically use stimulus funding in different ways, whether it's, data work and consulting, it's capital plan work, it's master planning, it's a whole bunch of different things that are all around how can I tell a story of what I need from a capital perspective and a maintenance perspective. So I know we covered a lot today pretty quickly. So if there's anything that we can do to help, pulled another poll up. If you want us to give you reach out and give you a call, happy to talk through some things and put you in contact with some people that have gone through some of the stimulus requirements and applications in 2020 and how they used it and where we can play a role and help. I also want to open up, while this poll is on the screen, also want to open up any Q&A that might exist for anybody on the thread here. While that's open, I'll actually ask a question. I know we've got just a few minutes here, but Paul, since some of this information was actually the first time you were hearing it as a part of this webinar, I'm just curious from a university perspective, maybe what had stood out to you as people are submitting questions. Thought it would be good to kind of get your thoughts on what was shared today.
Well, one thing I think that was really interesting was Shay's presentation on the different funding models and spend models in order to maintain a level of service. So having been through 2 facility condition assessments, the earlier one was back in 2010, I believe it was. One of the things that we were really trying to kind of get our brain around, we ended up with an FCI score of a 2.4. And it kind of, Shay's presentation threw me back into that time frame, because we were trying to figure out, and while that's an excellent score, was our spending model, did it need to maintain the level that it was in order to maintain that 2.4, or were we okay to let our level of service slide to a 4.0? And we started playing around with the various funding options to figure out where we wanted to land. And curb appeal is extremely important to us. As you know, most students, within the first 10 minutes on campus, they make a decision in their head or not, whether or not they're going to apply at that school. So we opted to try to maintain the 2.4, and we ended up going and asking for a little bit more funding so that we could spend on our assets and facilities so that we could continue to maintain that 2.4, because we could see from the facility condition assessment, if we didn't ask for the extra funding, that score was going to just naturally decline a little bit, just simply because of the age of some of our assets. So it really hit home on Shay's presentation. And I think that anytime people can take that information that Shay shared and play around with the service level that they want to provide and look at the different funding options and the funding tools on how much it would take to maintain that or increase it or decrease it, it's extremely important.
Yeah, it's good to hear. I know that those are some important pieces, just how we look at funding and how we apply that in different ways. It's a big change for where North America has been from an asset management perspective. So I didn't see any questions or comments in the chat. So just as a quick closing, we're going to be sending out the recording of this to people who have attended. So you'll see that. We also have another stimulus funding webinar happening in about 2 weeks that would be of interest. So when we send out this recording and this PowerPoint, all this information will be with you, and you'll be able to attend those if you're interested. Really do appreciate the time. Thanks everybody on the panel for walking through different facets of the conversation, and look forward to talking to everybody in the future. And just want to say thanks again for joining.
Thank you all.
Thanks everybody. Hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.